Looks like the gang is pretty much all here. My name is Dr. Jason Kane. Thank you for coming to, I believe, our 4th annual day-to-day presentation. I, along with, I guess I was the primary organizer, but I definitely had a lot of help doing this and putting this together. Our second speaker today is Erica Huerta. She's coming to us from, if I mispronounced it, I did it with flair. She's coming to us, I guess technically she works for Amazon these days via working at Whole Foods to begin with. She's got a very varied background, very interesting story on how she got to where she is, and just in general someone that I find rather impressive. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jason. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out today, and thank you for coming to my presentation this morning. I will apologize. I'm getting over a head cold, so I may have to go back to my tea in a second or blow my nose. Yeah, so interesting story. Let me just start off about myself. My name is Erica Huerta. I have a very technical background, but I am unique in the sense that I'm actually still a student. I didn't finish my undergrad. I'm actually studying at the University of Texas currently. Completing 2 different majors, one in economics and one in mathematics. I have about a year left, but my story is unique in the sense that I'm not a traditional student. I met Jason, how long has it been?
About 10 years.
10 years ago. And I was a very different person at the time. I didn't know what my path was. I couldn't even tell you at the time that I would be here today. Speaking in front of another university, I actually spoke in front of UT yesterday about my accomplishments. Back in 2005, I actually started as an architecture major, and from there decided it wasn't the path for me. And so what I ended up doing, and being fortunate having lived in Austin, was I decided to go down the technical path. It's a very unique path. It's a very hard path in some ways, but it's very rewarding with that. I taught myself how to program, so very quickly I had a lot of job offers. As you can see from behind me, I worked for a lot of really great companies in my past. A few of which to say, some were great, some were okay. A lot of my career was spent at home away. I was an analyst for their customer service operations team. I was actually their sole analyst and developed all the reporting for them. That was acquired by Expedia. I got an opportunity to move into the data science team at Black Locust, which was a startup company that was then later acquired by Home Depot. As you can see, there's a trend. At Black Locust, it was a great opportunity, though, to put on many hats. And for those who are interested in moving into the startup world, it's something I absolutely recommend, something that I actually personally loved, the energy behind it, the ability to really fluctuate between your roles on the day-to-day, from being a project manager to a data scientist, to a vendor manager, to a client manager. It's a lot of fun. I then received an opportunity to move over to Whole Foods, which then got acquired by Amazon, as you all know. It's a great opportunity, though. We are in a really ripe position right now to change a lot of the way in which the grocery industry environment is functioning. So yeah, my title now, I actually just got a promotion. I am now the manager of our competitive intelligence analytics team. What does that mean? It means a variety of things, and you'll find when you start applying for careers, it's not really anything fits within a box. You have teams who work in analytics very much in the business sense of gathering requirements, putting on that business hat of understanding operations. And then you have some of the mix of the technical aspect of it. You have folks who learn how to program, folks who can derive insights from big data. And as I'm sure you have heard that phrase before, big data is really a big trend in the coming years. All right, so that's me. And as an aside, I wanted to wish Jason a happy belated birthday. Yesterday was his birthday. I've known him for a long time. He's a dear friend of mine. And I still remember his birthday 10 years ago, which was a lot of fun. So happy birthday, Jason.
I am only 21.
Only 21. We'll just keep it that way. Okay, so what's our agenda today? We have, I think, and I hope, a good agenda today that really reaches out to you and connects with you guys. Again, sitting in your seat, I've seen this from the opposite side of listening to mentors, listening to other speakers, and I hope I resonate in some capacity to you. But how are we going to start this off? What is data? So data, if you are taught data, if you go into mathematics, if you learn business analysis or things like that, conceptually you're taught that it's 2 different things. It's qualitative or quantitative. Quantitative, meaning it's numerical, you can do arithmetic on it. And so for the sake of an example, I chose T-Rex, who's very popular these days. So when you think of data in the sense of what do you capture, T-Rex, what's distinctive characteristics? He's 6 feet tall, so 6 is a number. You can do arithmetic on it. He has one friend. He eats 3 donuts. Qualitative is all categorical, so he's brown, he's a carnivore, and he's currently not really liked by our president. So that was a Halloween joke if anyone saw that. So when you think a little bit on the grander scale of data, we can talk about just pinpoints of data, right? 631, not liked, brown carnivore. But what does it mean when you actually apply it? So the application of data and the application of analysis is far different from what you read in textbooks. And you'll notice that as you go more into your research career if you decide to go down that route. So data in general is it's not very clean. You tend to get either a data set that you spend tirelessly hours and hours of cleaning it, or maybe you produce that data set on your own, and then you realize it's not so great. But there's a variety of ways in which data comes. And so if you think of data and the way companies these days actually analyze data, you get a few different things. The top left image is a very old picture of an email, but we could do stuff like text analysis. We can understand the sentiment derived from a certain email or a certain text you send, or whatever communication you send across the internet, like Yelp reviews. We'll do sentiment analysis to understand what is the mood of our customer base. Images, we can actually derive information from images to see compatibility. So for instance, if you think of companies like Home Depot and Lowe's, a lot of strong e-commerce type companies, what they'll do too with images is understand, are these one and the same? Obviously, you can do Google images searches, so it's not too far-fetched from what I'm trying to conceptually tell you how it's done. But we'll use images as a way to determine, are these the same product when we look for price matches? Trees, so this was an interesting one I actually read in the textbook the other day. This was understanding how trees are clustered. And so you wouldn't necessarily think from an image you could derive information like that, but then you can understand behavior of trees and how they grow. And then of course, the very kind of more well-known sense is the Excel sheet that you will all learn to love, hopefully one day. That's really kind of the end game here, but essentially how you aggregate your data and really the starting point for any terms of analysis. Okay, the data economy. This is actually an article from The Economist that I read the other day that I really liked. The data economy, the intent is, oh gosh, there we go. The intent is stating data is really the new oil. It's the oil of the digital era. You have companies these days who amass large amounts of revenue. And how are they successful? Is it the services they provide? Is it the data they aggregate? Within the article, they actually listed 5 companies. They had Alphabet, which is the parent company to Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Microsoft. They're listed as the 5 most valuable firms in the world right now. And even in just one quarter, they amassed $25 billion in services. So not even necessarily in data, in services. So if you think about that, what does that really mean, right? So we pretty much leave a trail. And so how do we essentially not necessarily help these companies, but in a way, using their services, what ends up happening? These days, we have everything smart. We have a smart home. My significant other and I, we just installed a smart thermostat the other day so we can actually understand, are we actually saving money? Can we leave? Can we program for a different temperature? Are animals safe? You obviously have burglar systems. You have smart cars, Tesla. You know, I forget the metric now, but it was how many terabytes of data would it actually aggregate in just a few minutes of you driving that car? So what does that mean? That car gets smarter over time. They can sell that data to understand traffic trends. They can understand what roads they need to build from that. And then credit cards. If you think about when you go to Starbucks, for example, what do you use? Do you use cash? Likely not. Do you use their app? Maybe. Do you use a credit card or debit card? Likely. What do? You essentially leave a trail behind of your purchase behavior. And so again, as a company, as a private company or a public company, that data actually can be sold. It's not privy to you. We can actually go out to a vendor, a specific vendor, or even to a bank and request to purchase that data so we actually understand your trends in purchase behavior over time. But it's not just a one way, right? And so with data, what's interesting too is that as a consumer, we also benefit from it. As a consumer, we can understand, and it's probably pretty bad images from the back there, but you can understand price comparisons. So for instance, if you go shopping for a television, you have a particular television in mind, Google Shopping will bring up all the competitors and their prices. When you go running, you can actually track how well you do. You can see if you've improved from the last time. You can find friends with certain apps. Facebook, how often do you go on and you like and you share and you post, you friend and defriend? How often does that happen? All of that is captured. So in the day and age that we live in today, it's really, we can truly understand a consumer from a far different perspective than even 10 years ago. All right. So this is an interesting one. So as a manager now, we obviously hire folks. And we had a few recs. We actually still have them open. We had about 400 applicants, and we interviewed about 10 of them. And this slide really is derived from learnings in me interviewing people and understanding what is the gap here that makes me not want to hire someone. And also, frankly, learnings that I had too growing up in the path that I did. Again, being kind of unique, I had to, and not having a degree, I did have to sell myself to certain companies in the capacity and prove my worth in a way that I didn't have, again, a degree to back me up by it. And so these, again, are learnings from my career and also from interviewing folks. But understanding data, know your business. The biggest gap that we see in the business industry today as an analyst, and so this may ring true to you as you move on to your career, sometimes not. So if you go down the analytical route, especially, the biggest gap that we see today is a gap between what we call IT, so technical folks, and the business operations side. And what does that mean? So for instance, if I'm in sales, I'm a sales manager, and our software isn't working. We have clients trying to call in, we can't pull up their profile, we don't understand how much revenue they generated or we've generated for them over a given period. They're upset about something. So we reached out to IT saying, hey, the site's down, something's not working. They said, hey, we're backlogged, we don't have enough people. So there's a gap, right? They don't understand the business need. They don't understand, on the opposite end, how much technical resources it requires to fix something like that. And so what happens is you have just this complete disconnect and nothing gets solved for. So as an analyst, and having grown up in that environment, especially in the technical capacity, what I've learned over time is to speak the technical talk. It doesn't mean you have to be a software engineer. It doesn't have to mean you're a developer on the side. It simply means that you take the effort to learn essentially their language. So know your business, know how you operate, know what it means when you say, when we make a sale, what does that mean in our data set? So when you guys move on, you'll use a variety of software tools. One of the primary ones is Salesforce, others is Tableau. So you have to understand how your data is captured, but you also have to understand how your operation functions. So for instance, if you think of maybe like a retail environment, when you make a purchase, that doesn't mean that's your net revenue. You also have to think of returns. So something as simplistic as that definitely gets more complicated as you go on into whatever field that you choose or whatever career you choose. So know your business, and for those who don't know what SME means, it's you're a subject matter expert. So be the person essentially you can answer all the questions and not have to turn to someone else to help figure out the answer. Let's see. Learn how your data is consumed. So that really falls in the same realm, especially as you move down the data route. Learn how your data is consumed is learning the technical speak of your counterparts. So when we have issues of why does our net sales look off, right? We can always pose that question, but it always takes longer to get the answer back if you don't assist along the way. A lot of the TMs that I hire, we call them team members, we don't call them employees. A lot of the TMs I hire, I very much tell them take the extra step. Take the extra step in actually understanding your business so that you can actually create great partnerships with your technical counterparts. Because one day, you'll need a favor that they can help with. Derive your data. Another big aspect of being an analyst these days. When we interview folks, it's actually interesting. Over time, what I've seen with analysts in general, and especially as you apply it to marketing, because marketing has their own analytics division, really anything has its own analytics division. There's obviously one from Comp Intel. But what we try to seek out, though, are people who can also derive their data. So essentially, they're not turning to another team and saying, hey, can you pull this report for me? Or hey, can you pull this data from me? They know how to do that themselves. And we can talk in a bit what that actually means. The biggest one, though, I think innately to be successful as an analyst, to be successful with data, is be curious. A lot of people tend to just pull the data and not question it. And we kind of have some cool examples to go through in a second. But be curious. Always question the data. Don't be fearful to doubt that something may be wrong. Very often it is actually, even very kind of high-end companies that you would think that would be very foundational and clean with their data tend not to be. So don't be afraid to question something. Don't be afraid to check something. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. Because more often than not, what ends up happening is that you go, you create a deck, you do a report, you put something together for an executive, and you go to your executive and he says, this is wrong. So what do you do then? If you're not prepared and you hadn't done your due diligence, now you've lost credibility. So be careful with that. Just be curious. Question it before you walk in. Visualize your data. Visualization has become a huge trend in the last 10 years, especially as a product like Tableau, there is a seminar later today that you can go to on Tableau that Jason's teaching. That it has really taken off. Tableau is a visualization tool that I believe is free to students here at Ole Miss. Take advantage of that. Take advantage of all the products, all the software, all the hardware that you have available to you that you have on discount right now. It's much more expensive when you're not a student. Trust me, believe me, it's very expensive. So please take advantage of it. It may not seem useful now, but the second I see Tableau on a resume, they fall to the front of the line. Gather insights from your data. So obviously data is useless unless you can derive a message from it. You can derive an answer from it. This becomes a little bit more of, I would say, the analytical statistics route of understanding a histogram, for example, understanding a distribution, understanding impact, correlation, in some ways drawing causation from that. And then present your data. Again, there's a lot of attributes on here that we expect from people these days, but presentation is very much a rare one these days where folks can't necessarily present. They can derive insights, they can pull mathematics behind it, they can create the algorithms, but they can't necessarily communicate that. Be careful, you don't want to inundate your business partners, you don't want to inundate your customers. You want to be able to derive something that makes sense to them, that answers their question without too much information. All right, so how to derive your data. So this is a continuation of that section right here. As you move into data, and frankly, we've really seen data be a part of everyone's lives all the way up from, or all the way down from specialists up to the director level, where they really have to learn to still manipulate data and get information on their own. Excel will be your best friend. I had a student yesterday ask me, said, do you look down on Excel? I was like, why? Why would I look down on Excel? It's like, well, you have other tools. You have more advanced tools. You've studied so hard. Why would you use Excel? It's like, well, frankly, it's still a foundational tool, and you still have to relate it to business partners. As much as I code and program and write procedures, I can't go up to my business partner, have them sit down with me to review something that I programmed. It didn't make any sense to them. It won't make any sense to them. So what do? I take that information and I make it make sense to them. You have to tune your message to the people that you are delivering it to. So when I go to a director for sales, for example, I'm not going to talk about correlation. I'm going to talk about impact to their business. So be careful with that. Excel will always be your best friend. Pay attention to your data analysis and statistic courses. Another one that has come up in a lot of interviews, we have folks who may have gone the mathematics route, may have gone the economics route, marketing route, and they list courses that seem relevant to the job they applied for. That's great. But I will challenge that. I'm going to ask you questions that you would know if you paid attention in that class. And if you didn't, unfortunately, you don't move through. So be very careful with that. Pay attention in your class. Trust me, in having gone through college the second time in my career, it's very much that the skills that you learn today are very valuable in applying it into the career path that you choose. And when you do list something, let's just say even as simple as Excel skills, people will test you. People will make sure that you know that. So be careful with that and pay attention. Take your professor seriously. Learn how to program. This is a fun one and obviously true to my heart. This is obviously a little bit more advanced, right? So if you do want to go down the analytical route of understanding true causation, true correlation, how to write algorithms, how to understand regression, I definitely recommend these tools. Our studio, I'm sure some of you have heard about it. If not, definitely something worth checking out. These are open source programs. You can learn them. There's a lot of resources behind it. Python's the same way. Another open source program. It's a lot of fun, actually. I know it sounds silly, but we can talk about programming in a second. And a programming language that often gets lost on, for whatever reason, learning, SQL is a big one. SQL is something that is used to extract data in large databases, even small databases, really. But it's used practically by every company. You can actually use Python to do some of the same things, but it's definitely something worth knowing. Learner visualization tools. So obviously we talked about Excel. Tableau is another great one. They have done a great job in the last, I would say, few years of really enhancing their program to something that is very usable and intuitive from where they were in their first versions. And then we talked about this, take advantage of your student discounts. Trust me, it gets much more expensive the older you get. So take advantage of those. Take advantage that you have a free Tableau license. I think by itself it's $1,000 normally. But get experience with it, get hands-on with it. And then convey your message. We talked a little bit about that, but essentially tune your message to the audience that you're working with. Again, if I'm working with a sales director versus our CTO, those messages are very different. So be cognizant of how you deliver your message, how you deliver your end product. This is a fun one. There are 3 kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. So this is supposed to be a little bit more interactive. And I wanted to make this fun for you guys, so I added some graphs in here and some questions in here, and wanted to get your thoughts on this. So this is a graph, actually from a few years ago. It's called the diminishing financial return of higher education. And so the intent of these exercises is for you guys to question, is this right? Is this wrong? If it's wrong, why do you think it's wrong? Challenge it. So what you see here, I don't know if you can see from the back. So you have the blue line, which is the tuition, room and board, so the cost of college, and then your bachelor's degree earnings. So obviously you see the blue line move up, and then you see the red line kind of consistent down here and a little bit downwards. Does anyone want to challenge this? What are your initial thoughts? What is this trying to convey? That it has diminishing returns, right? That students aren't making as much and college is much more expensive. But what would you do to challenge it? Any thoughts? No one? Yeah?
I would ask the student survey what they majored in.
What they majored in is a great one. That's fantastic. Other thoughts? No? What's a diminishing return on not getting a degree, right? What does this actually mean in terms of earnings? Is it when you graduate? Is that when you graduate? Is it consistent when you graduate? But after 8 years, after 10 years of tenureship, what is your earnings then? Is it much more? Does it exceed the tuition? What's another question you could ask?
Is it talking about the total cost of all 4 years and comparing that to 1 year's salary?
Yeah, that's the intent, yeah. And also it's a point in time, so that's what you're drawing, right? It's a point in time. So $45,000 a year versus $95,000 for the entire 4 years. You don't just work 1 year, right? So always question this stuff. So people will draw conclusions, they will be biased in the message they try to convey with data. You can always lie with statistics. That's the biggest, I think, not so obvious insider joke, is that you can always lie with statistics. You can move data in a way that conveys what you're trying to convey, not necessarily what the actual truth is. And here, this isn't inaccurate. This is accurate data. But the intent is that the message could be very different if I did the visualization different, right? If I showed your potential earnings over a 10-year period versus how much it cost you for a 4-year period compared to had you not gotten a degree, right? It's very different. This is a good one. This one's more of a joke. So with data, you can always find some weird correlations. Does everyone know what correlation means? Data moves together, right? So if they're correlated, they're highly correlated, they'll move together. If they're not, they'll move apart. And so here, it's a fun graph. It's just kind of a joke graph. But it's the age of Miss America winners versus murderers by steam, hot vapors, and hot objects. And as you can see, the younger the contestant, the winners were, the less of the murders. So there was a very high correlation with it. I think, yeah, 0.87 is a very high correlation with it. So how can it not be right, right? So if you had a contestant that was, let's just say 18, then you would assume less murders. But again, is there really causation there? No. There may be correlation, but there's not causation, meaning you won't anticipate it because it doesn't make any sense. Okay, this one might scare people. I don't know if people actually know this one. So we use hand sanitizers a lot. The biggest thing to look for is the asterisks, right? So when you look at articles, you look at the source. The intent is to, again, question what you review, what you read, what you take as truth. In this case, this asterisk actually is, so you see on here it says kills 99% of germs. We're familiar with these two brands, for example. Now, the asterisk, what it actually indicates is that's in a laboratory environment, it's in a controlled environment. When you do studies in what we call like the real world, when you try to simulate the real world, or when you actually are in the real world, it's actually closer to 46%. So again, be careful of the marketing that's used behind this stuff. Always question it, and definitely as you move into marketing, publication, and things like that, we look to you to really challenge that, to make sure that we are disseminating the correct information here in a way that really is closer to the truth than not. All right, my favorite part. Everybody in this country should learn to program because it teaches you how to think. I think this is a great quote. I personally have grown a lot from learning how to program. I have been very successful in my career in a very unorthodox way of being where I am today, being in a very successful company, working for Amazon, hiring people that are just like me, still in college. With that, you do get a lot of kind of being that weird person, being that person who learns how to program at a young age. You do get a lot of opportunities. You do get a lot of opportunities. Tech right now is booming quite a bit, especially in certain cities. You wouldn't find, but like Cleveland, for example, is booming a lot with their tech industry. Austin, obviously where I'm from, is doing the same. Silicon Valley obviously is known for that. The biggest thing when I tell people, especially my TMs, about learning how to program, I do hire folks who don't know, but that are interested in learning, is just start small. The biggest thing about program is that when I tell someone, hey, do you want to learn how to code in SQL? The first thing they think of is the matrix, right? It's like you got this running list of numbers and everything's green and everyone's in a dark room and you don't want to be that weird kid that it just has such a stereotype. But really take it and challenge it, right? Challenge that stereotype. For me, it was weird to learn. When I got hired for my first job, actually I don't think I've told anyone this story, my brother and I got hired at the same time. I was hired as a specialist for $25,000 with no undergrad. I was eager to learn and I was eager to take on challenges, but as a 21-year-old at the time, it wasn't a lot of money, and so I wanted to project myself forward. And the job opportunities at the time, there were two. There was one on programming, which my brother got, and there was one on vendor managers, which is a little bit more of you're talking on the phone, you're helping with billing and things like that. And I was told I got that job because I'm a girl and I shouldn't be behind a computer. I shouldn't be programming because I would find it boring. So obviously you take it with a grain of salt. You get what you can. The irony is I actually learned how to program better than my brother. And I love him to death, don't get me wrong. He's a great programmer. But the reality is there's a lot of stereotypes involved, especially as females, and we'll talk about women in tech in a second. So don't be afraid of challenging that stereotype. But the biggest thing I always say is start small, start simple. Programming is a lot of fun in the way that you actually get gratification pretty quickly. You know if you program something poorly because it will tell you. You just hit the execute button and it will say essentially no. But if you do program something and you hit the execute button and it returns something great, that's gratifying. And so you build off of that feeling. You build off of just those small learnings, and it's cumulative. You'll learn in time, so don't pressure yourself to be this amazing software developer. Just start small. Take a programming class. So I heard at Ole Miss, which I think is fantastic, that you have the opportunity to take a programming class in lieu of a foreign language class. And I think that's fantastic. I think that's a little bit more in tune to the days and what's happening in our industries than a lot of universities. Even at UT, you can't do that. We actually don't even have access to programming classes unless you're a computer science major. So I think that's a fantastic thing. please take advantage of that. It's much more valuable than it may seem right now, but just take it. Learn those syntaxes, learn the verbiage associated with programming, even just the basic structure of it. It's all, again, baby steps. This is a cool thing. So download a programming app. I don't know, I'm probably the older one here, but did anyone ever use Mavis Beacon when they were young? Yeah, so typing, right? I love that game so much that I think I typed I like 100 rates per minute. I forget now, my score was insane, but I love that game so much, especially the Frogger version of it, that I think by 4th grade I was typing out my professor's syllabi. So definitely do that though. Make it fun. It doesn't have to be boring. The same capacity when you learn how to play piano. It doesn't have to be boring. You can start with something that's of interest to you. There's so many apps these days that you can take advantage of that make it much more fun and make it more of a game than anything else. Online training sites. So in addition to your university courses, apps, there's a lot of online training sites. Is anyone familiar with code.org? No? It was a site that was actually compiled together by a lot of larger companies I even mentioned earlier, Amazon and Google being a few of those. And the concept was how to learn how to program in an hour. Maybe you guys have heard of that initiative. I think it was on Facebook a while ago. But essentially the intent is you have all these modules that you can click through, a whole bunch of videos you can click through, and they just make it fun for you. Khan Academy is probably one you're familiar with. They do the same thing. They actually are hosted on the code.org site. But you can always use any of these sites just to give it a shot. It's a lot of fun. Obviously, there's a huge community around it, especially online, that you can always ask questions or a whole bunch of forums if you get stuck on something. Try to use those if you can. Coding boot camps. These are actually really popular in Austin right now, and I'm in between as to recommending them or not. Coding boot camps, if you don't have them here, what they tend to sell you is a Taker training course. It's a 14-week intensive course, and coming out of it, you're gonna make X amount of money. And so it's folks who maybe they studied, I don't know, biostatistics, and they wanna learn how to code in Java. So they take this coding boot camp, and they come out, they're like, I'm a software developer. Like, not quite, 14 weeks is very, very short. But it's good though. I mean, you can still learn a lot in those 14 weeks. Coding Dojo is one of those, and they boasted that they had candidates, entrants who came at an average of a mean of about $35,000 a year earnings, and by the time that they had graduated their boot camp, they were making a mean average of $72,000. And so there's obviously still value, even in a 14-week boot camp. You can even take that with a grain of salt, though. I'm sure there's some outliers with that. But the reality is that programming in this day and age, in this technical world that we live in, especially as we surround ourselves with data and leave our data trails, is much more relevant than it has been in the past. So even if it's just a little bit of interest to you, I would say give it a shot. Don't shy away from it. Break that stereotype. And then join meetups. I don't know how many meetups you have here, but in Austin there's a ton. But you can always do the meetups online. And so essentially find folks who are just like you, who are learning, who have interests. Take advantage of that. Essentially create your social groups, your support systems. It's a lot of fun. You meet a lot of great people. Women in tech. So this is true to my heart. So women in tech, especially as you move into the STEM fields, obviously you find that women don't take the majority of the class, for example. So my mathematics courses, I have, let's just say 60 people on maybe of 1 of 5 females. And so it's very prevalent, especially as you move into your careers. Unfortunately, those proportions don't really stray from what you see in classes. So as a female, I'm a strong advocate for it. As a female, I say break that stereotype. We often see that there's not a lot of female programmers, but we do our best to support in a way and in the community in a way that makes them feel like they can move forward with something, that they don't have to feel like they're gonna get paid less, that they don't have to feel like they're getting challenged differently just because they're a female. Obviously from these stats, you can see that 57% of professional occupations are held by women, but in this context, 26% of computing occupations are held by women. And it frankly rings true. You go to Austin and you see some of these companies and you walk into a floor, you walk into a meeting, it's very much male dominant. Don't be scared of that. Be the female that, be representative. Bring other females along with you. Support your females. It's, sometimes there's a mentality as a female that you have to be above the rest. You have to prove yourself. You have to act like a man, be a man to be successful. Don't let that get to you. Be who you are. And you'll find that you'll be successful anyway and support people around you. That's really how you grow. It's not about tripping over someone so you get to the top. It really doesn't work that way, not like in the movies. It really is about creating a support system, and frankly, that's what made me so successful in where I am today. A few other stats. That's probably kind of a downer, but women are own only 5% of startups. So startups, small companies, tech companies primarily. Think Silicon Valley, Austin, Cleveland. A lot of other cities are taking that on. Women hold only 11% of executive positions at Silicon Valley companies. So if you think of the grander scheme of it, especially as we talk a little bit more tech-related jobs, this is more of the opportunity piece right here. There are roughly 7 million workers employed in the US tech industry today. There will be another 1.1 million growth over the next few years by 2024. In other words, there's a huge potential here that we can take advantage of. Be that change. Be the women that change that 26% to 57%. Be that change. All right, a little bit non-politically here. Build experience with data. So as a student, you often challenge yourself with, how do I get to a career? How do I get that job interview? How do I get to a place that I really want to land at? Like, I want to work for Amazon. I want to work for Facebook. I want to work for Google. How can I get there? A lot of applicants I talk to, it's very interesting. You have a lot of folks that are eager, and that's not to be looked down upon. But what I don't see from a lot of folks are the folks who went ahead and took the step. And what I mean by that is, when I ask students or when I ask potential, oh no, thank you. When I ask potential employees, what is it they want to do? Are they interested in programming? Are they interested in learning statistics? I often hear, yes, I'm interested in learning. Yes, I'm interested in statistics. Then my question is, why haven't you learned it? So take that initiative. It's very rare for someone to say, yes, I'm interested in it, and I took this course, and this is how proficient I am. Those are the people that I look for. I don't want to have to push someone, right? I can't be a micromanager. I can't be the day-to-day person, and frankly, you don't want to be micromanaged. It's very tedious. Essentially, you have someone over your shoulder the whole time telling you what to do. There's no room for creativity in that. So what I do look for are people who do take that initiative. Again, when it comes to programming, if you do have interest in it, there's nothing stopping you from learning that now. You have a plethora of resources. You have a plethora of free software and discounts and classes and online stuff that you can really take advantage of to start learning today. And trust me, even candidates that told me, for example, hey, I downloaded Tableau and I've been playing around with it for a few months now. I'm not super proficient, but I am learning. That's a candidate I'll listen to, because they at least took the step. And it seems like such a large hurdle, but it really isn't. So just start small. It really goes back to starting small. Challenge yourself just a little bit, and really that will propel you forward much more than most people. Other stuff. So we talked about enrolling in analytical courses. Join a research project. So you guys are at our university. You have the opportunity to join research projects if you want, or start your own. That's another cool thing that you can obviously do. You have some time maybe to play around with that. Build Tableau visualizations using public data. You can always use the Census Bureau data. It's a lot of fun actually to play around with it. You very quickly learn that all data is not great. It's not all clean. So maybe that's a good learning for the real world. But still a lot of fun that you could do. My favorite, enter competitions. You can actually start entering competitions even as a student, even as a novice. Tableau has a lot of competitions you can enter. You can join analytical competitions that are often funded by companies. So Amazon, for instance, or Google will fund some challenges, and there's often rewards associated with their first and second prize winner. And then applying for internship, that's a little bit more obvious. Apply for internships in between your sessions, right? So maybe take your summer session, apply to a few internships, gain that experience. I promise my internships don't entail coffee runs. I think that's silly, but take advantage of that. There's some applications that you learn working on the job that you don't necessarily learn in the class. Some are great, some are not, right? So political stuff, when you have to navigate personalities, is not something you necessarily learn in class, but it's great hands-on experience when you do learn that. But take advantage of it if you have the opportunity to do it. All right, Q&A. That's it for me. Q&A session. I didn't talk a lot, obviously, about Whole Foods and Amazon, so I am restricted a little bit about that, but I am willing to answer whatever questions that you guys have. So let's take advantage of that. Yes.
I'll take you up on that. What can you tell us about what's going on? What are you doing with data?
Well, what are we doing with data? So my particular team or in general?
However you want to answer it, I guess.
Okay, yeah, so we do a whole bunch of data, obviously. My particular team is fun, I think, and I brag a little bit because I actually really much enjoy it. The quantitative and qualitative thing is very much real. My team in particular, we do a few different things. So in competitive intelligence, what we're tasked with is understanding our competitive environment. So who are our competitors as Whole Foods, for example? Is it Kroger? Is it Costco? Is it Sprouts? What other revenue streams do we want to compare ourselves to say, hey, that's a challenge, do we take it on or not? My team in particular, we look at a slew of things. We have mounds and mounds of data that we look at to understand, oh, this is what a competitor is doing with their promo cycle. So how often are they discounting something? Or this is what a competitor is doing with maybe new products they're bringing on board, so new assortment structure. Or a competitor is building X amount of buildings in the slated 10-year time span. We look all sorts of things. The opposite side too is we do a lot of research. We have to understand on the qualitative side what our competitors are doing, how they're spacing their stores, for example. Are they getting into the e-commerce world? Do they start selling online? What markets are they in? Why are they in those markets? What consumers are they looking at? Do we overlap in consumers? Do we want to take their consumers? So it's interesting. We have so much data to look for. So when we talk to candidates, that's why we have to be so particular, because it's not so easy. It's not so easy as saying, hey, here's some data, and do a very quick pivot on it. We have to look a little deeper. And so we are fortunate in the ability of being able to use all that data to derive those decisions. As a team, we're still growing from that. We're still growing and using data in a way that we haven't even used 5 years ago. Obviously, with the onset of Amazon, we would have more tools. We have more investment to do a little bit more sophisticated stuff than we've done in the past. So it's pretty exciting, I'd say. Yes?
So who are some of your top competitors, and what trends do you see emerging in that field?
Yeah.
Database predictions.
Is this getting recorded? Kidding. That's a hard one. And I say it's hard because we're so focused in markets still. We have a lot of retail space. We are now emerging in the e-commerce world. So it's interesting. You can really pave it in a variety of ways. You can compare yourself to competitors that have a ton of stores, like Kroger is a great example of that, Safeway, Lions. You can compare yourself to your more farmer market types, where they take a little bit more of your local base, but of course that's not everywhere. You can compare yourself to, at the time before Amazon acquired us, we were comparing ourselves to Amazon Fresh in the way that not comparable in the sense that we were doing delivery, but they were consuming our market in the sense they were taking our customers from us. So there's never a very clear-cut answer. We have to look at it in the sense of what markets are we talking about? What revenue streams are we comparing ourselves with? It's very much that our competitors or other folks in the retail industry, they're a competitor in some capacity, right? And so we tend to learn from what makes them successful and how do we apply that as a strategy versus saying, this is a particular competitor we have to focus on. Because not every company is doing it perfectly. We're not doing it perfectly. But how do we learn from those, and how do we apply those in a way that makes us successful?
Quick follow-up.
Sure.
What about your brick and mortar stores? What's your strategy on that? Are you still looking for places to put them, or are you scaling back?
I can't answer that question. I'm sorry. We are doing a lot, though, so expect a lot of change in the coming years, frankly. But from where we are today, we're still growing, if that helps. Yes?
What advice would you give someone who has like a lot of professional experience but wants to make a career change into this particular career?
Into data, I would say just go ahead and take it by the horns and dive in. It happens a lot. I mean, in some capacity, I did it too, just younger from architecture. You don't learn anything in studio. You can apply to data, frankly, unless you can draw it. And it's one of those things that don't be afraid to tackle programming, for example. You have a lot of free resources you can use. I was fortunate when I started, even at a very low salary and no degree or anything, I was fortunate. I had a really strong mentor who was our CTO of the company. And he actually helped me along and learn how to program. And I pestered him all the time. I love him. His name is Bill Fenig. And he would give me advice on SQL, and he would always be my partner in crime. And it felt like it was one of those situations you have to surround yourself with people that support your initiative too. Sometimes you don't have the support system. Sometimes you just have to work hard for it. Right now, I'll study until 4 in the morning and then go to a meeting at 7. Sometimes you just have to grovel through it, and unfortunately, that's how life is sometimes. But just don't be afraid to dive into it. There's always a win at the end of it. There's never anything wrong in learning something new. But also, join those meetups, join online forums. Really, again, support yourself with a community that supports you back. And then stay in touch with me. Yes?
What are some of the mistakes that you see marketers make with data and data decisions?
Data decisions and data. So not marketers in general, so I wouldn't want to answer it that way, but often we see, maybe in publications, is that you see even in that article here, is that they're conveying a message that isn't entirely accurate. And it's one of those things that, yes, they convey their point, and maybe this is the point they were attempting to make, but it's more of how do we convey the actual truth? We all know when people read articles, they don't tend to read past headlines, for example. And so we have to be better about showing and really being closer to the truth than what this is trying to do, right? This doesn't really tell you that if you don't have a degree, you may not do well at all, and that you'll likely not succeed further than 45 grand. It also doesn't tell you that after 10 years, you may be 10 times more successful than that. So it's not necessarily wrong, but it's that how do we achieve true truth and how do we communicate that truth in a way that's not so biased as something like this. And it falls true even when you do presentations. You often have to remove your own bias of what you assume the data is attempting to tell you. You have to actually look in the data and even challenge what you think the data is attempting to tell you. I'm trying to think of a few examples where a sales manager would go in and say, hey, we're failing in this market. Why are we failing in this market? It's like, actually, your phone systems were down. So, it's stuff like that. You may derive a very quick hypothesis on something that's maybe going wrong, but when you look at the data and you're like, oh, wait, no, it wasn't working. We're actually fine. Our revenue's fine. We're just backlogged and giving you the data. That's all. So it really applies, I think, to any industry, to any career. You just have to be cognizant of your data. You have to know your data. Be that SME.
Can you talk more about your process of gaining insights from your data and some of the hurdles that the more common hurdles that you get?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So working with data, the biggest hurdle you'll ever encounter is it's not clean. So what that means is you look at data and say, hey, from the onset, this looks like, well, so an example at Whole Foods, our point of sale system, right? So how many transactions go across the register? You can say, if we pull from this table in the data in our data warehouse and our server, we pull this data, this is how much revenue we're making. Well, it doesn't account for returns. Okay, add returns to it. Well, it doesn't account for vendor discounts. Okay, add those in. So you gotta be careful because sometimes even those data sets that you try to insert aren't clean. And so it becomes particularly more difficult if you work for a company in which you don't own the data set yourself. So for instance, if you do surveys, you own that data set, right? You own the questions, you own the responses, you have essentially an Excel sheet of responses you can go through and clean up some stuff that maybe didn't make any sense or maybe change questions that seemed biased for whatever reason. But when you work at large companies, often you have a lot of what we call tables. So if you think of a data server as just this mass amount of data, in some capacity it's still structured though. So I have essentially a data set that tells me how much was transactional across our point of sale system. I have another data set that talks about returns. Even those aren't clean though. So you just have to question it. You have to be the subject matter expert of it. In my career, in my successes has been not because I taught myself just to program, but because I was curious too and challenged even what the data set said, right? Sometimes you have competing answers. So if you were tasked with telling how much revenue we had for Q1 and I was tasked with that same thing, it's more often than not we will have different answers. And you'll see that at a lot of companies. And so just be careful of that. It's always about cleaning data. Question your data before you derive these large answers from it, sometimes because it just gives you a completely wrong answer. And the problem is when you deliver a wrong answer, strategies in place with the wrong answer, you're going down the wrong path. So clean data is really the biggest hurdle.
So how do you resolve those discrepancies? Do you do another round of research, qualitative research?
Yeah, it's really all over the place. It really depends. I've had, gosh, every single one of the companies I worked at, even up there, it wasn't perfect. You run across some very obvious stuff that you look at and you're like, we had a gift card for $500,000. Like, that's not right. Or obviously there's some fraud. Like, it could be one of the two. You had some stuff that wasn't so obvious where this is really the gap between the software developer, the technical engineer, versus the business type analyst who really works in the business front, how your tables are structured. And that gets more complicated because you truly have to know how to program to understand how is that table even set up? Was it maybe taking data sets and saying, no, don't add it in the table, it's not necessary, when in fact it was necessary for the business. The whole concept of gross money versus net, we had that same issue at another company I worked at where they thought they were in the concept of how many phone calls we were getting. They weren't accounting for drop calls. And so all of a sudden their numbers were inflated because they weren't looking at drop calls. And so when I looked at how it was constructed in the back end, essentially, we said, hey, we got to remove these because that's not time in which our customer service reps are talking to customers. That's actually lost time. So we need to change our strategy so we don't have customers who drop, essentially. It really is all over the place. There's really not one bullet answer for that. It's really being that curious person, though, and figuring out, okay, what's wrong about this, or is there something wrong about it? Sure.
If you were to hire someone tomorrow, what would be your top 3 reasons for hiring them?
Top 3 reasons? So as you move into your careers, hopefully you're not as bad as me. I like to work a lot. I am a workhorse. But with that, when you move into your careers, what you come to find is you're around these people much more even than your family. And so you have to like them. It's one of those things that they don't have to be a perfect candidate. I'm not looking for a genius. I'm not looking for someone who's worked in business and computer science and who's come from Google. I don't look for that. What I do look for are people who are great to work with, who want to collaborate, who take initiative. So when I talk about, are you interested in programming? And they say, yes. And I say, why haven't you done it? Then that shows a lack of initiative, right? We often get people who come to Whole Foods. A lot of companies have what they call core values. Whole Foods has very strong core values. And so one of the questions, especially as we get into the later rounds, like the final panel interview, for example, when we have a group of people and we ask you questions for about an hour or so, I can't tell you how often someone fails on that question. What is a core value you associate with here at Whole Foods? Like, we like organic food. It's like, that's not a core value. So do your work. You have to show initiative. I also understand that there's a lot of people who just apply for tons and tons of jobs and, they're lucky to get a call back. But even if you have 2 hours before you have to do that interview, take those 2 hours, research the company, try to figure out how that company relates to you. A lot of companies don't just hire people just to do stuff. They hire people that they can work with too, right? You never work in silo. You tend to work in the team most. Great question. Yeah?
Often when I watch your reviews, I see charts such as the one you have up there that I have to question what their intent putting it up was.
Yeah.
Do you see a place for analysts such as yourself to help, advocate for accurate conveyance of those messages, as well as educating the public generally about some basic ways to interpret what they see?
That's a great question. It's interesting. I'm not particularly in a position where I can do publications, right? And so as much as I want to argue something like this, although John Mackey loves to argue stuff, I could. It's not that I wouldn't. I just don't. That's a great question. It's actually challenging my values on it now. I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. I think it's hard also to have such a loud voice in a place where there's so many things going on, that everything moves so fast or is so viral that, making a comment or sending an email, what's the value behind that? But I think it'll be interesting as we go beyond kind of this, what was the phrase I had written down? False facts or whatever, what's the phrase? Anyway, so as we go beyond that, we start challenging that status quo. I think it's a little bit more on the mass level than it is on the individual, but frankly, it always starts on the individual level. That's a great question. I'm not sure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Just to kind of talk about what you look for when you're hiring people. You talked a little bit about mentoring relationships, and most of the people in this room, I think, are going to be looking for a job here about the next
Nice.
just to freak y'all out a little bit. How important is it when you're coming in as an employee to kind of look for those mentoring relationships? And should you walk away if you don't see those kind of things? Like how important in those initial steps of recognizing a company that they're going to do those things for you, or there's someone there that can work with you versus just taking whatever jobs?
So like as an employee, the value of having someone that
Yeah,
can
if you were just
help you?
coming in as, you're doing this again and you didn't know, the value of going to a company where you know there's people that are going to support your development there versus just being at a company. Like say maybe you go hypothetically to Facebook. Facebook's a big name, but there's no development there.
Right.
Versus going to a smaller place where you know there's somebody like the person you met that's really going to enter the
Yep.
early part.
That's a great question. Actually, fantastic question. And this will hopefully resonate with you guys as you move into maybe your second or third job. Don't take a job just for the money. There's jobs that I've taken where the promotion was great, that the environment seemed great, but I had this gut feeling that the person I was going to work for wasn't going to support me. Had this gut feeling. And I was right. And it was a great promotion, but I would have very easily been much happier in the job that I left under a great boss. And so it's one of those things, sometimes you're in a situation where you don't necessarily have choices. You don't have 2 job offers. You may just have 1. But if you are given the opportunity and you are given the choice of even just waiting for a different company, take that. You won't regret it. And the reason why, unless you're frankly getting like kicked out of your apartment and you don't have a place to live, still have a job if you can. But the reality is you seek mentors because those are priceless. Those are so hard to come by. When you find a boss that you are excited to work for, that's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I have now in a position, I'm very fortunate. I have 2 bosses, actually the 2 above me, I absolutely love with all of me. And I will work 80 hours a week, and I know it sounds scary right now, but I will work for them because they work just as hard for me. And they benefit me, they give me bonuses, they give me promotions, they tell me, and frankly, even beyond the money, there's the aspect of, Erica, we appreciate you. We're going to tell everyone how valuable you are to this company. We know that you worked hard that weekend. We know you were up at 4 a.m. We know you did this analysis. It hasn't gone unnoticed. That is much more valuable than a paycheck in some capacity. So great question. As you move into these companies, as you interview them, don't think of it as just selling yourself in the capacity of this is what I know and what I can give you. Question it vice versa. What can you give me back? What value do I gain in coming to your company? Do you guys sponsor certifications? So like if you want to be a project manager, you can get a certification as a project manager or PMO. Or if you want to learn Tableau, you can get a certification in Tableau also. Ask those questions. Ask what they give back to their employees. That's a very important value to have, and especially, again, as you move from company into other companies, you'll find that to be more valuable than not. Great question.
What do you think about using data to psychoanalyze consumers for marketing endeavors? Is that a trend that you expect to continue?
I think it will continue. I think as we gain more data and more insights about people, we will always use that in the sense that obviously there's an end goal for certain companies. It's to be profitable in most cases, right? Or in others, it's just to learn behavior to then sell back around to someone else. I think, frankly, as we leave more trails, right, with credit cards, with apps, with whatever behaviors we have online, we will use that to our advantage to understand how to tailor something. And don't always think it's bad either. Sometimes when we do marketing efforts, for example, we want to understand what's the abandonment rate. Did the coupon work, right? So it's not necessarily a bad thing. We're not trying to redo the world here. We're just trying to figure out, did this coupon work for you is a good example, right? Did someone actually purchase the ribeye if it was $2 off versus a chicken that was $1 off? So the more we understand consumers, though, the more we tailor to what you like, and obviously a way that also benefits us. So don't always think it has a negative connotation. In some capacity it is, but sometimes it's positive. But yeah, I do see it trending upward. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Great questions so far. No? All right. I did leave my email here. Let me just move it to the last one. Feel free to keep in contact with me. We are hiring also, so if you would like to be on the other side of that phone with me, please feel free to email me, send me your resume. Be happy to chat with you, even as a mentor. So thank you so much, guys.